Okay, so hello everybody. Again, I will today postpone the calculation of the Heckscher-Ohlin model because over Easter I did some at least descriptive analysis about the US trade policy in during the last 2 months, and actually I already knew quite a lot about it. But what I then found after I did some research in the internet, what they have definitely done during the last 2 months, then actually I was a little bit shocked, not because of what these guys have done in the United States, but if I then see what is our reaction to it. And you will see in a minute what I'm talking about. Because, oh yeah, this I forgot, I think. Then I just put it in the Moodle course. Because if you go to the web page, the main communicating part, if you do not always want to look at Truth Social or something else, then the communication or the official communication of Donald Trump is going over the following web page, whitehouse.gov. So here you find every nice decisions, all his things what these two guys are doing during the last 2 months after the inauguration of Donald Trump for for the US president. And explicitly, these are the executive orders, and this is a special possibility which the President of the United States has. He has much, much more power than a chancellor in Germany. He can really just write down laws which are in charge more or less initially. The next day at 12 o'clock, whatever the next day. This is what he is always signing, and when you are just looking at some American TV channel, more or less every day he signs something. And he signed, of course, also some executive orders with relation to trade policy. Yes, and I wanted to put some page, and then you can just download it from the Moodle course. Straight. There we are. And here we are. So, let's start. How everything started in the second administration of Donald Trump. Well, just after his inauguration, and this was also what we have expected. Because on the other hand, he's a guy, maybe in opposite to other politicians, who before the election say something and after the election they do the opposite. He is quite often doing what he have announced before the election. Well, and he just said, I love tariffs and I will raise tariffs. And then on 11th of February, the first announcement was just 25% on steel and aluminium tariff. Well, this was actually not a real surprise. This is more or less the same tariff he has introduced in his first administration. And why aluminium and steel? Think about the so-called old industrial core of the United States. And this is the region around the Great Lakes, and especially Detroit as the former largest automobile factory region in the world. And right now, who wants to buy an US American car? Almost nobody, unless it is produced in Köln or Rüsselsheim, Ford or Opel. Okay, well, this he announced, and because, okay, the old industrial core, automotive industry in Detroit, and the other ones, there is also it is also called a Rust Belt, because of all the factories where you have formerly produced metals in the United States, until it was then much cheaper in China, in India, and so on. Okay, well, but also we in the European Union are exporting quite a lot of these materials, not the raw materials, but later on then products generally made for the construction sector or anything else to the United States, because especially the demand for European goods made out of steel, and especially for German goods made out of metals. Well, we do not have the metals just in Germany, but we importing the raw materials, especially from India, and then we manufacturing then some special products, especially for the construction sector. Well, and we do it that good, so they have such a high quality that they almost demand inelastic by the buyer. So to speak, it doesn't matter what price it costs. You need it just. So you can raise the price quite high, and still you can sell this. Well, and this is quite a good situation then, because then you can put a tariff on it, and if it still is imported in the United States, you just get the cash. Okay, but he has also the idea that he wants to reduce imports. So in general, this was not the end, starting with these 25%. And we come to this in a minute, because at first, 1 month later, you see, we had a reaction from the European Union. Well, and this was also not a big surprise. This is more or less the same reaction we had already made 4 years or 5 years ago in the first Trump administration. There we had still a plan or countermeasures how we have reacted for 5-6 years ago. Well, and we only reactivated these programs. Well, they are, so to speak, still in the cupboard. And we only had to open the cupboard, take it out, and say, well, we do it again. So this was the first reaction. And well, then, and I do not call this day with this title he gave this day, because this has nothing to do with the title he gave it. So at the 2nd of April, there was this announcement that he just said, well, now let's start it. Nobody in the world was coming to me and said, well, you great president, please, please, please. So worldwide, every import 10%. Well, it is not that much, 10% of a tariff. And his general argumentation was, well, in general, and maybe you have read about this in the media, that roughly the United States, a free country, a great country, or it was a great country, um, and always arguing for free trade, they have, so to speak, an average, or before that, they had an average tariff of almost 3%. So a very small cap on the imports to the United States. And the argumentation was, well, in general, the tariff to sell products in the European Union is roughly 10%. Well, so at a first look at it, you can say, well, he is doing only, so relative to the EU, he's only doing the same as we do to the United States, because we have there this discrepancy of about 7 percentage points. Well, but this is not the end of the story, because our tariff has another reason. So we have this European Union of a single market of 26 countries. And there we then said, forming these single market out of 26 national states, we have more or less general rules how much tax we have to pay when we are selling products within this market. So no exports, imports. We have just general tax here. And so what is the tariff? This is just the number that you, if you want to enter this single market, that your products, when they enter this single market, are playing on a level playing field. Because everybody who is not importing, so from Italy to Germany or everywhere in the single market of the EU, there we have, on average, it's not always in every country the same, but on average we have more or less the same tax. So if we would have no tariff, then relatively the importing country would be relatively cheaper. So to speak, the reason why do you have this general tax to enter this market is that you say, well, you have to pay this, that then afterwards, selling within the EU, every good has more or less the same price. Or not the same price, but the same is doing it in the same framework. Well, of course, he doesn't. If you explain this to him, or if you cannot explain anything to him, because well, he doesn't want to think about anything. This is my opinion about this guy. Well, then he still says, well, there are 10%, we have 3, so if we now raise our tariff to 10%, then everything is okay. But this was not the end, because then, and this is more or less now called the formula of evil or whatever, he then announced also, and let's have a look at the internet, then I can show you a picture. Trump, 2nd of April, tariff. Let's see. Here we are. Do we have a nice picture? This one. Oh, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is always a very good source, you know. So let's copy this. Because then, oops. Then he also announced, well, I have a nice little highly complicated formula. And with this highly complicated formula, and about this formula we will talk in a minute, I can definitely calculate for every country or regions, because then he said, well, we have a single market in the EU, not for Germany, for France, but in general then for the whole EU. For every single country, so to speak, in the world, I can calculate with this formula, highly complicated, an individual additional tariff, which is the best we can do and which we have to do. And then you see, well, the formula says I have to add for China a tariff of 67%. And you see here, again, this sign, this you can download from whitehouse.gov. And you see here also, oops, where is it? Here, everywhere you have YouTube videos and so on. And this is the sheet he have showed at this day. He gave this, awkward title. Okay, so he said, well, this is the tariff we have to put on China, 67. And now, since we are nice guys, because why, I don't know, but we then divide it by 2. So you more or less every time see here Vietnam, this formula says 90%, so 46 or 45%. So it will be then 90 point anything, and therefore then they raise it from 45 to 46. So, and then there's a funny thing. If you look in more detail at this picture, then you see, so this, oops, let's take this in red. So this 67 just comes out of this formula. How I will I will explain to you in a minute. So, and then you see, well, at first you look at this page and then you say, well, I see there always individual numbers. Because statistically, if you apply such a formula, it would be highly improbable that there are many countries where the outcome is the same number. Because I can already say it, these are exports and these are imports. So this is volumes of exports and imports. So, but then if you have a look at more detail on this number, on this page, then you see, wow, UK, 10% and 10%, no division by 2. Oops, Brazil, 10%, no division by 2. So this is then divided by 2. Oops, Singapore, again, Chile, Australia, again and again. And there you find it's tariffs for about 60 countries, and I think 15 countries or something like this. You find a 10% on the left and on the right. And maybe you have already, because we have talked about the gravity model of international trade, and if you look at these countries, and maybe it will be easiest if you look especially at Singapore, Chile, and Australia. What can be the general difference of the trade relations between these 3 countries and maybe Vietnam or China? If you think which kind of goods will or is the United States interchanging with Australia, with Chile, and which kind of goods are they exchanging with Vietnam and China. And what could be then the main difference between the trade relations? Do you have an idea? Especially if you think about Australia, what kind of goods they are trading in the world. Not oil, but something similar. No. Yeah, and almost all raw materials we need for our industrial production. And because why? Well, it's a continent. It's almost twice the size of the European Union, and there are just living 30 million people, I think. So they have many, many raw materials every industrialized country in the world needs. And also the United States needs, although they are for their own, even a little bit larger in area than Australia. But in the United States, there are living 350 million people. So, and what kind of goods do China and the United States or Vietnam and the United States are trading? What, low cost? Really? What's coming? What kind of goods come to us if you do not only think on about AliExpress or any other internet cheap internet platform? What kind of goods are we buying from China? And these are more or less the same goods the US citizens are buying from China. Do you have an iPhone? Yeah. So many electronic products and in general goods for your kids they are playing with. So many, let's say not really cheap, but simple consumption goods we are buying from China. So, and now if you think about the trade relation between Australia and the United States and let's say here, because later on we come then in detail to China, Vietnam. They are also manufacturing in because they have very low cost for for their workers. Um, uh, so all these goods would be relatively then cheaper compared to manufacture these goods in the United States or in the EU. So comparative advantage just because but it is then in parallel comparative and absolute advantage. Okay, um, but if you think then in volumes of exports and imports, how will it look like? Vietnam, US, and Australia, US. Because what kind of goods should a Vietnamese citizen buy from the United States? High price car or something like this? Of course not. And Australia, well, they of course import things from the United States. They are also a highly developed country. But if you compare it in volumes, 30 million people versus 350, and many enterprises, firms which need raw materials. So here, US imports smaller than, oh, sorry, the other way around. US imports much larger than US exports. And here, it's just the other way around. US No, what do I say? No. Um, is it really that kind? Because now it's not a good example I made. They have raw materials. So my argumentation is wrong, sorry. Oh, I think it is the other way around here because of the services. But this was not a good example for me. Here, because this is then the reason, but I'm sorry, my argumentation was not good, then they are not that much uh, importing from Australia, then they have enough raw materials. So here we have US exports, sorry for this, are larger than US imports. For this, then I had to look in more detail in the different goods. But I think the reason would be then mainly services, I think. But this is actually the reason. Every country where you have these, where else here, these countries, US has not a deficit but a surplus. Has a trade surplus and not a deficit. Well, and if you look at this formula, and as I said, I have to put in because otherwise you won't hear me in a minute. Sorry.